Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Scott Gaworski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history we are likely to ignore. And with me as always is my co-host Crystal Newton, business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Saddle up for a wild ride through today's most important news. Okay, welcome back here to 775 Alive. We just wanted to drop a quick episode because, of course, we're in the midst of primary election season across the state.
Hey, so exciting for us political nerds.
Well, it is very exciting, and of course, it's not just Nevada. Of course, we had our election, primary election, June 9th was our election day. We should have the results by the time this episode drops, at least here for Nevada.
Yeah, not for California. They started a week before us, and they're going to keep going for a few more weeks because it's California.
You want to talk about California a bit? And I think we ought to, because one of the things about California I want to bring up is that if we follow their election timeline, right, that's going to give us, an extra 30 days to sort of edit and drop this episode and still be relevant to California elections.
Right. Yeah, so there's a few things. I mean, they've found people, homeless camps where they're actually harvesting ballots and filling out for them. Somebody actually just got sent to jail for that, which it's nice to see some prosecutions. But California is allowing people to write the date on their ballot, and they're accepting that. And I think we're going to get a Supreme Court ruling on that. But there's all sorts of shenanigans going on in California. But we did get a Republican through.
Oh yeah, Steve Hilton.
Yay! And I think Californians, they have a thing for accents. If a Republican has an accent, it's like we fly under the radar.
Well, and I think there's a couple more interesting things about that. So one, of course, about a month ago we did the interview with Chad Peace, who that independent voter network IVN project he's with. I was just noticing today they did a podcast talking about the California elections and just how problematic this has proved out to be. Of course, he's in favor of open primaries, and he thinks a true open primary system would solve some of the problems. But I'm not convinced, because one of the things California is looking at is there's a petition drive for a ballot initiative to get rid of that open primary system now. And a lot of it seems to be generated that they're upset by either a Republican getting on the ticket or that the possibility existed for two Republicans to get on the ticket.
It's almost like they don't like Republicans.
Well, and that's been one of the arguments, is that, at least in my mind, whenever we've seen either these open primary systems or like the French model, this two-turn, right, this two-stage election process like they do for president, what it seems to do is, and at least in my mind, tends to actually accelerate a push towards single-party systems, right? Mm-hmm. Or some sort of composite system that doesn't seem to be able to get anything done, right? In my mind, it seems to tamp down political diversity, not encourage it.
Yeah, I mean, the mechanisms really aren't the thing in California, because we've seen several mechanisms be implemented and then dismantled when they didn't get the result that they wanted. So I know it's maybe not the mechanism, it's just California not wanting Republicans to be elected. I'll just say it.
That's one of the arguments. And of course, Sandra Cosgrove and Doug Goodman. Sandra, of course, we just did an episode on redistricting, but she's very interested in this open primary issue here in Nevada, which is going to come up a couple times, because when we get to Nevada's election here in a minute, that whole issue with the nonpartisan turnout is one of the big driving points towards this.
Yeah.
But also Dave Goodman, who's with the Nevada Electoral Reform Project. I hope I got that right. Sorry, Doug. Him and I have been in conversations, and I think at some point we might want to propose the four of us sit down and do an episode. I think it'd be an interesting discussion on the open primaries. But the California thing, just a couple things. So the lady who got charged with the homeless charges, or the not homeless charges, but illegally registering and voting for homeless people.
Oh, Carl, it's not just ballot harvesting, it's voting harvesting, because they have them sign the ballot, a blank ballot, and then they give it to them. I'm like, oh, that's worse than ballot.
The idea they can help fill out the ballot. Well, and there's also charges that have come out made by the Pratt campaign in the LA mayoral race that they were actually paying people. to vote, which has been controversial. Of course, back in 2020, we had a big controversy here in Nevada that, particularly on some of the tribes, what they were doing is like, oh, if you come in and vote, we'll give you a gift card, a $25 gift card or something.
Yeah.
And does that count as paying people to vote, bribing votes? I mean, these are some of the issues we're bizarrely having to deal with now. But the point I wanted to make is the lady with the homeless votes that just got sentenced, that was for previous elections,
Yeah.
right? And same thing with the lady who's now awaiting sentencing, where she, in an act of spiteness, was stupid, right? But it's an interesting story. She registered her dog to vote and voted on her dog's name, right? And it's sort of like there's obviously holes in the system,
Yeah.
right? And I think we're at the Supreme Court. The big question in front of the Supreme Court, of course, we've already had one decision in the Pennsylvania case that, or yeah, Pennsylvania case where there is such a thing. Or no, excuse me, it wasn't Pennsylvania case. That's the one we're waiting on. It's the Virginia case in a redistricting,
Yeah.
right? Where they did this ballot initiative without, they had to do it have it finalized so many days before voting started, and they didn't do it. So they didn't
Mhm.
have the final language for valid question until after mail ballots have gone out. And the argument they made, well, that's 45 days for election day. Election day is the focus. But then on postmarking ballots, they argue it's election season. And, the ability to pick and choose from a legal framework is really a bad approach. So we're waiting on the Supreme Court to make a decision on that. And I think California is just going to add more fuel to this fire.
Yeah, California is a bit of a dumpster fire right now. I do want to talk about Nevada, and we political nerds, we get a little bit this is like when you hear sports people talk about the draft and they're picking members for the teams, like that's how excited we get about it. The primary to me is like the draft. And you like try to read it and see what the responses are. And I'm trying to read into all this data, but of course, not many people turn out for the primary. So it's kind of hard to extrapolate data because you have a limited sample size. But I did you take a look at the numbers across the board for Nevada elections for turnout, where?
And I'm going to have to excuse me. Voters are going to have to excuse me. I want to get these right, so I'm going to put my glasses back on here. So statewide, so far for 2026 primary, we're looking about total turnout at about 21.7, 21.8%. So about one in a little less than one, or a little more than 1 in 5 voters.
Yeah.
But it's been very hodgepodge, right? So somebody ran some stats. If we look at the congressional districts, of course, Nevada has 4 congressional districts, 3 centered around Vegas. All of them seem to have somewhere between the 20 to 35% turnout for Republicans, right? CD2, which up here in the northern half of the 775 had over 40 some percent,
Yeah.
right? So there was a marked difference, and a lot of that was how contentious that CD2 congressional race ended up being.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, no, and you're right, because it was weird for me. It felt like it was a boost for the primary, but now we're starting to hear on the back end uh from that contention, the people that lost their candidate are now like, I don't want to vote at all now. So you're right, it could drive down the general turnout for Republicans. So
Well, I'm actually not sure that Republican turnout. I think there is a casual. I mean, everybody's been talking about the low propensity Republican voters,
yeah.
but I think there's also a category we might call the casual Republican voters that will show up in almost every election unless you really annoy them, and then they disappear for an election. I think that's a slight possibility. Frankly, what I'm more worried about, and I'm trying to put some data on this historically because I think it's an interesting issue. But I know here in Elko County, for instance, if we looked at the 2022 primary, which was the last time we had the governor's office on the race, right? Um, Basically, we had a very sharp distinction between Republican and Democrat turnout versus nonpartisans. But those
Mhm.
nonpartisans who did turn out, and in this race, I mentioned over 26% Republican turnout in Elko County, just over 30% Democrat turnout in Elko County, 6% nonpartisan turnout. So even
Mhm.
with the possibility of being able to switch registration on day to vote in one of the things, they just didn't do it.
Yeah.
But about 2/3 nonpartisans who show up in general election tend to break for Republicans. And they were actually a huge key for Lombardo's victory, which was very narrow over Sisolak, right?
Yeah.
And I think the fear is not so much that Republicans aren't going to vote in that CD2. It's that if this turns into a repeat of what was a very nasty, and a lot of people are like, well, you just have to do that. Well, I'm not sure. I think that campaign, that CD2 campaign here, actually turned a lot of voters off, right? Just the nastiness of the election. Some of the new techniques they were doing. I ended up fielding a bunch of phone calls from people that frankly were upset about the text messaging.
Yeah,
And what they were upset
I'm
about.
not even in this, and I did my share of fielding calls for these candidates, and I was like,
Well, but
crap.
yeah. Well, the
Yeah,
problem with the text messaging wasn't so much that the message within the text. It's just like somebody would get them and they have that unsubscribe option. So they'd unsubscribe. And then 2 minutes later, get the exact same message from another phone number.
yeah,
So the
yeah,
sense that they can't unsubscribe from the system just annoys them. It's people like, well, they can go through the state and get their name taken off. Well, I'm not really sure that's a viable option. Right.
yeah.
Um, but
So,
anyways,
so what we're worried about right now is there's a split in the Republican Party over CD2, and the Democrats would love to get CD2. So we're super nervous right now between Republicans losing, let's just say enthusiasm, and Democrats gaining enthusiasm. I'm like, oh, please don't lose this seat. Please, 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 please. Oh my gosh.
well, and there's also going to be a complicating factor, I think, within this. And again, I think the Republican side stuff will largely be healed, at least on the public facing for the vote, right?
Yeah,
I do think there's been a lot of damage done on the back end that's probably going to take years to be repaired. That's not apparent yet, but at least on the vote, I'm not really concerned about Republican turnout. Again, it's the nonpartisans. And what's interesting in this case is that a large part, as we talked about when we did the rural issues episode, a large part of that CD2 race turned on to this weird debate between national issues versus local issues.
yeah,
And already, since Teresa Benitez Thompson has won the Democratic primary, which I think everybody thought she was going to,
yeah,
just in the last week, she has turned very strongly on a whole range of rural issues, right?
yeah,
Data centers that we talked about with AI. She's made some pronouncements on other stuff. And of course, one of the things we've been following, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, Elko County really seems to be, in particular, sort of a focal point for world democratic efforts to reach rural communities. And I
yeah.
think that's going to continue across CD2 as well. Again, I don't think it's going to impact the Republicans, but I think we're going to have a real situation that if we have a Republican candidate that only wants to talk about banning Sharia law or Somali immigrants in Minnesota, and a Democratic candidate that's talking about AI centers and water rights,
Yeah.
uh, that could lead to a dicey situation.
Well, and we know that a big chunk of Nevada voting comes from the independents, and the independents aren't having the mega thing right now. They are not having. And so I'm concerned that Teresa's going to do a great job of sounding like a center candidate, and Flippo is going to be doing the mega thing. I mean, we all support Trump and we want to, enshrine everything he's done and try to keep the wins that he's got. I get it. But we also need to understand that the independents are tired of it. They don't want to hear it. They want to hear some moderation. So I'm very concerned about CD2.
Right. Well, and I don't, and it's a House seat, not Senate. We don't, one of the problems we have is this is not an election where there's a Senate seat or a presidential seat, one of the one every 12 years. So
Sorry,
we're
did I
already
say it?
dealing with a very low turnout issue, right?
Yeah.
Now, there is an argument that the last time this happened in 2014, Republicans did very well because they were able to drive out the base,
Mhm.
right? Well, again, part of what I'm worried about is it might not be enough this time around.
Well, and I also think that Amade's been able to keep that seat for as long as he has because he is such a centrist candidate. He appeals to both sides. And I'm like, Flippo does not. And again, I appreciate the track he's taking. It's not a criticism of him. I'm just thinking it's not the winning track.
Well, and I do think the Democrats have a lot of uphill hurdles out here in the rurals, right? Washoe's a different story because of the impact of Reno. But I don't think they're going to get successful. But again, we've seen not only a series of meetings with the rural Democrats have been out here, and I'm going to pick on Elko because I know these are happening, right?
Yeah.
We've had rural Democrat or the Democratic Party of the states held rural meetings out here over the last couple of years. Ro Khanna from California, who's undoubtedly going to be running for 2028 presidential run, setting that up. He's been out here twice. I got invited to a couple of those events. Even I would say, I think that was part of the region, although it was a great interview, but Adrienne Marsh from Altum Insights, when she reached out, I mean, she's a Democratic strategist and is
Yeah.
really interested in understanding some of these issues. I think there's a real interest out here for the first time in a long time because in the diagnosis of the Democratic election performance that's been going on since 2024, they're realizing rurals are a problem for them.
Hmm.
And I'm expecting them to use this CD2 race, which is open for the first time in what 15 years. They're really going to try to use that to deploy some strategies, and I'm not really sure the Republican establishment has quite caught on to that issue yet,
No.
right? So,
I have a question. I don't know if you can read anything out of this data, but it was super interesting to me. Joe Lombardo won with over 90% of the vote, and the next highest vote getter was none of these candidates. So, what does that mean?
what was that? Sorry.
What does that mean? Is that the voter who is that voter? Those 3,000 voters that said nobody.
Well, and for those of you outside of Nevada, we do have for state races, although not for county and municipal or federal, of course, an option to choose none of the above. It's sort of ridiculous because it's not binding.
It's not. It's the political way to flip off the process.
Well, yeah, I mean that's exactly what it is, and I think that shows you. That shows you a couple things. First of all, I think it's an example of the solidification of Lombardo's position on the Republican side. I don't think there was any doubt, but the fact that a couple of his candidate opponents, of course, you and I have done a lot of talking. We haven't had a chance to do an interview, but done a lot of talking with Matthew Winterhawk um, over this campaign cycle in various settings. He gave us a huge shout out when he made that visit to Winnemucca and saw our saw our
Yeah,
banner up, right? Um, the fact that him and Irina Hansen uh, both didn't score higher than none of the above. I think
yeah.
both of them ran non-traditional campaigns,
Well, I
right?
expected Winterhawk to be a little bit bigger because he did cover so much ground. He did meet with a lot of people I know. I've had people like text, do you know this Winterhawk guy? I'm like, yeah, I do. I like him. He's a little bit too high energy for me, but I'm more of the Joe Lombardo. I like my leaders to be cool, calm, and collected. But
Yeah.
I like the guy, I expected him to do a lot better than that, though. I'm
Well, I sort of expected to. I was surprised with how well Irina Hansen did. Who I've never met her in person. As far as I know, she's never been out to Elko County. But one of the interesting things about Irina Hansen and Winterhawk both, and this gets back to your point, they both ran campaigns that leaned heavily into these AI generated flyers and stuff. The
yeah.
use of AI in campaigns is really, I think, one of the uniquenesses of this particular primary cycle. What was your concerns about AI?
I thought that Spencer Pratt's AI video, I spent an evening watching his videos and I was largely entertained. And then right after I watched that slot of Spencer Pratt videos was when the AI stuff started coming out between Settlemyre and Flippo. And of course, it was a little bit more somber and serious because it was my own home territory. So I scrutinized it a little bit better. But it very quickly became apparent to me that, if every politician did these types of videos, it would very quickly go out of vogue because it's just kind of ridiculous and hokey. And at the end of the day, you kind of want to go back to, I want to see a traditional, I want to see you talking like a normal person. Um, I think it'll be a bit of a flash in the pan once everyone starts using it. We'll be like, ah, it's another AI video.
And for the Settlemyre ones, you're talking about the stranger videos, which
Yeah.
sort of gives this neo-Western take of Flippo as a carpetbagger coming into the Western town and
Yeah,
drawing on
but
all the tropes.
I'm not sure what the copyright laws are on that because that looked exactly like Flippo. Do public figures not have the same protections as everyone else?
No, no, and political campaigns are even lower. And in fact, we were talking about the show. You thought how unique it was AI coming up in this election, but one of the things that I'll point out is it actually came up fairly strongly in the last election. There was some AI generated content, one of the Republican primaries down in Vegas, and that actually led to the Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar here in Nevada proposing a bill. It was known as AB 73. I actually testified against it in its original form at the legislature because what they wanted to do was basically they wanted that any type of AI generated ad would basically have to be cleared by the Secretary of State's office, or they could issue fines for what they considered fake content. And I mean, the problem I had with it, and I still have a problem with it, is I think we've learned having the government determine what's fake is probably the absolute worst policy
If
decision.
I if I remember right, that just strictly pertained to slander, right?
No,
Take
No.
something true.
Well, what happened is in its original form, and why I testified is they were trying to draw distinctions. So, for instance, somebody brought up in one of the testimonies, what happens if you have a candidate holding a baby and the baby throws up on them, and you go use Photoshop to take the vomit smear
Uh,
off their, that's probably not AI. But the problem you have is when you have the Secretary of State's office saying, and again, this is the Flippo Settlemyre race is a good example because so much of that turned on to what a lot of people saw as mischaracterizations of Settlemyre's voting record, right? That he voted on something in 2013 that now means something different in 2026 and trying to draw the continuity. You could have, in the original version of that bill, a Secretary of State saying, okay, this is the truth, this is the falsehood, and you're going to get a $50,000 fine, right, because of that. And that's wrong. What they did, and I think this is a much better approach, and I'll point out that one of the people who were really concerned about this was actually the news media. They were afraid if they did a story about an AI generated ad, they would be subject to these fines because there was no exemption,
that's why I brought
right?
it up. I'm like,
Where the slander thing came from is why this wasn't apparent up front. It wasn't AI. This is really a slander issue when you mischaracterize somebody's position. And what Nevada ended up doing, which I think is the right approach, is basically creating an expedited process for the aggrieved party to file suit in the courts,
mhm.
right? So it's not the Secretary of State determining what's true or false. Instead, if somebody's claiming slander, we're going to make sure this doesn't sort of percolate for 8 months, right? We're
Sure.
going to have a process where this can be resolved fairly rapidly. I think that's a better way, but I bring it up that it was AI that sparked these debates about all this.
Yeah. No, I just wonder because as a business person, you have to be very conscious about using other people's images and stuff. Like if I created an AI video of me talking to Donald Trump and him talking back and forth, I am 100% certain the Trump organization would sue me immediately and they would issue a cease and desist letter. So I'm kind of curious where the lines are because it's like you're using the image of someone else, and I get there's a different category for public figures, but I don't think I could get away with creating a campaign ad with me and Trump in it. I don't think that would work
It's gonna
legally.
it's gonna depend on it's gonna depend on how it's taken, first of all, right?
Right.
So, and what I mean by that is that if you create a conversation between you and, let's use President Trump, where he's saying something he wouldn't normally say, that would be problematic, or making claims he endorses you or whatever,
Yeah.
right? That's problematic. I think is that would get you into trouble. But if you're doing something, I think, where you're creating a conversation where you know your part of this ad is, hey, President, I'm so great at the job you're doing on X, Y, or Z, and he says, yeah, I was so proud of that achievement. Nothing's going to happen, right? I don't think you're not going to hear anything about it because the context is different.
Well, we'll definitely find it. We'll find out after this election cycle because if lawsuits are going to fly, then they're going to fly after this election cycle. So we'll see. Maybe the court system still has to work out the details on this.
Oh yeah, well, and it's not just this is something. I mean, Hollywood's going through this with the AI use of actors and everything else. This is going to be a big issue that's going to take a decade, I think.
Yeah.
But in the campaign space, to answer your question more directly, and we've seen campaigns for years when you have the headlines and the picture of the candidate, and that's fair use, right?
Yeah.
Here's a public statement. Here's the results of a vote they made. That I don't think AI is going to go different. I think it's going to only be if you are again like a defamation standard or a slander statement, if you consciously attribute to them something they didn't do,
Yeah.
right? If you went out and said this candidate does X, Y, or Z, I think you're going to be in real trouble that they didn't do, right? Serious stuff, right? But
Well,
I think it does leave a bad taste in people's mouth, and I think that's the biggest
yeah.
issue with this right
Yeah.
now.
I mean, it was entertaining, like I said at first, but I could quickly project that if every politician was doing it, I would get burnt out on it really fast. What was your impression when you watched that? Did you watch any AI videos? Or you
Oh
watch
yeah,
most
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I watched quite a bit, and Spencer
Spencer
Pratt's
Pratt
campaign
one?
was well, and one of the things is Pratt's campaign, particularly the Star Wars one, right, where he's the Jedi taking on Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom as the Emperor and Darth Vader and the Emperor,
Okay.
right? Uh,
I
that
gotta say, that
that
one was my favorite. My favorite was like he was Batman and Karen Bass was like the Incredible Hulk or something like that. really mad that he's cleaning up the streets.
Yeah. Well, but see that both of those are parody, and parody is protected,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it gets pushed, and it's interesting that, frankly, the people who seem to have a lot of problem with parody um, is actually the Democratic side right now.
Yeah.
But that is protected.
But as a consumer, what did you think?
No, the humor was good, and I think it's a novelty. I don't think it's going to be a solid basis. Now, I will tell you one Spencer Pratt thing that wasn't AI that I thought was the most brilliant ad campaign I've seen in a while was where he sent the people out with the stencils that said, "Imagine this street was clean, vote Spencer Pratt," and they're putting them on these LA streets and then pressure washing the message
Yeah.
into the dirt buildup on the street. That was a heck of a powerful ad. That was an AI. But that was, or at least I don't think it was AI. I mean, you can certainly do that. But that, I think, was a very interesting and powerful message. Um,
And I gotta say, I was thoroughly educated on the homeless industrial complex and the issues through Spencer Pratt's videos. And so that actually, regardless of whether he wins or not, because to be honest, the mayor of Los Angeles can't do much. Because even if you start prosecuting and take off the street, you still have a DA that's going to turn around on cashless bail and put him right back out. So there's not a lot he could have done. But his running and putting out those videos and teaching people how this homeless industrial complex works and that they're actually importing people from other states, I think that's enough for Californians to start to rethink this whole thing. This is not just, oh, these are, people that are down on their luck and they have nowhere else to go. Let's be nice to them. This is an industry. And I think Californians might start to understand that.
yeah, and I think there's something else here too that gets us back a bit to the CD2 race is that what makes those images or what makes that type of campaign approach so interesting is that it's actually focused on issues. It's not focused on straw figures. It's not focused on bogeymen. It's like, okay, this is why we're having that case. And I actually think that's far more attractive to both these casual Republican voters and nonpartisans.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things. I mean, we saw this in the CD2 race where a lot of the stuff on social media back and forth is like, yeah, you keep claiming that the other guy's bad, but what the hell are you going to do?
Right.
And I think that's really a big untapped resource right now. And I get candidates don't want to do that because, 2 years down the road, that's going to throw it up. But, the truth is you need to talk about these issues. We're not going forward if we don't talk about these issues.
Yeah.
Right. And, that's why we're doing, that's part of why we're doing this is talking through this stuff that's sometimes uncomfortable.
Yeah, and we haven't been around that long as a country. 250 years is not that big, but even with our short span, we've been able to identify cycles within our populations, and it just seems like, every few decades we have this welling up and people get angry and outraged and there's a whole bunch of chaos and then it settles back down. And it never lasts for that long. And so I would think it would behoove most politicians to get ahead of that trend line and go head back to center before it becomes mainstream because they'll be the first ones there and it won't look disingenuous.
Right. And I think, well, I agree with you in part, although I actually think that the problem isn't so much sort of a nebulous idea that political ideologies get out of control. I think what happens, you have institutions that naturally age. And that's where we are. Some of these institutions that we've had 50, 60, 70 years now aren't serving the purpose, whether that be NGOs that might have been set up to deal with occasional homeless in a situation of the mid 70s, late 70s.
When they suited the culture of those generations.
Right.
Yeah.
They're no longer solving the problems we want them to solve.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And
we
I
have
think that's
adjustment every few decades and it's a normal thing, I think.
Well, and that adjustment requires conversation, and that's one of the things I think we've largely lost in the political context. Good example of this is the ongoing issue about debates, right?
Yeah.
Going back to Matthew Winterhawk, it challenged Governor Lombardo to 17 separate debates in all 17 counties of Nevada. Carson City is a county in this context.
Yeah.
And is sort of like that. That's just not going to happen. That is a big waste of time. And some political pundits have argued, well, the problem is debates seem to be attractive only to the challenger candidate who thinks they can get the establishment figure to trip up. But one of the things that's happened is we're not seeing debates even once the primary is set anymore like we used to 20 or 30 years ago.
Right.
Right.
I mean, having a substantive debate.
Yeah, we probably need to, and Metin Pekin was talking about this and folding in that his model of no party democracy, mandatory debates.
Yeah.
at least before the legislative bodies. But the truth is that I think there's a real interest in going back to at least parts of that. No, we probably don't need 20 debates. I mean, that's you're just going to exhaust people,
Yeah.
right? We don't have the bandwidth that somebody had, say, in 1857, Lincoln and Douglas traveling the country having these debates. But at the same point, the number of election cycles we've had here over the last 10 or 15 years where there's been no debates, none whatsoever. I think one of the things that does is it sort of reinforces this idea that you only have to talk to this small audience. And it more than anything else, I think leads a lot of people feeling to be frustrated that
And
unless they go to that audience, they don't get to hear from these candidates.
the polarization in this country, it's like, if you just talk to the other side, they're at least you figure out they're not a monster. They're just a person that's coming at problems at a different from a different place. And the moment both sides start to talk, then that center reveals itself. The commonalities reveal itself. They're there. It's just our culture's looking through this lens of what divides us? What camp are you in? And it's like, well, you could also look like what brings us together. That's another lens. And so you do need those debates to bring that frame for people like, hey, we're all trying to work on this thing together.
Well, and that's key, and it gives you options, it gives you stuff. So, are the candidates this cycle around going to embrace debates? I'm not really sure. We're going to have to see. On my part, I'm trying to encourage it for whatever little influence I have, right? Because I think it's very worthwhile. But ultimately, it's going to be campaigns' decisions, and unfortunately, I don't think a lot of campaigns have stomach for debates anymore, right? Which is something I think we've really lost
Yeah.
as a way to tamp down some of this polarization, right?
Yeah.
Um, back to the Nevada races. You brought up an interesting thing about the endorsement issue.
Yes. I wanted to know if you made anything of that. And I almost hate to bring it up because it may be seen as a little bit negative towards Lombardo. And I don't mean that. But most of the candidates that were endorsed by Trump won, and not many of the Lombardo endorsed candidates won. Do you make anything of that?
Yes and no. I think the Trump endorsement still plays a role in the primaries. The real question is, I think over the last two election cycles, it hasn't done anything in the general,
Sure.
right? And I think that has been a real problem, right? In fact, some people have argued it's been a negative in the general, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something to, I think, watch for. Lombardo's endorsements, I don't. Again, that CD2 race where Lombardo endorsed Settlemyre, as did Mark Amodei, who rarely makes endorsements. I don't think that's definitive of anything, just because that was such a weird race. The other one
Mhm.
you brought up, and probably the most surprising race out of all this, was the Secretary of State's race,
Mhm.
right? Where Jim Marchant won with almost no campaigning whatsoever, except maybe a little bit down in Clark.
Just by the smallest margin he won too. Isn't that a cliffhanger for a little while?
Well, it was, and part of it was divided, right? So Sharon
Mhm.
Angle, and again, I will say to Sharon's credit, she put in far more effort and energy than any of those other Secretary of State candidates, not only visiting people and talking to people, but some of her research. And if I would say anything, she's one of the few that understood the Secretary of State's office doesn't just do elections.
He wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
A woman wrote
Well,
about it. It's in your house. I've seen it.
right. No, no, no. She did write a book somewhat about it, but just this campaign cycle, she did a lot of policy briefs that were really good looking at this.
Yeah.
Um, I think the real problem with Lombardo's endorsement on this, uh, uh, for some reasons that I'm not comfortable with sharing. I think there was some behind the scenes tragedies that went on within the Fulkins Robbins campaign that pulled her off the campaign trail.
The real thing I'm concerned about is I'm kind of seeing indications of a split in the Republican Party, and I'm looking for all those little hiccups in the seismometer to be like, which way is it going? Because it kind of seemed like this primary was about either Nevada first or Trump first. And I kind of split it between the Trump endorsements and Lombardo endorsements.
I think that's where it played out, but Lombardo actually made much fewer endorsements this time
Yeah.
around than he normally has.
Yeah.
Or at least I think he made some endorsements in state level races,
Mhm.
um, or state assembly and Senate races that I think most of those actually panned out okay for him.
Yeah.
Right. I'd have to go back and do a tally. But
The more local the government, the more they're like Nevada first, and then up to the national level is more of like the Trump endorsement level stuff.
well, no, and that I would argue is sort of natural. I mean,
Sure.
you do want people in your local community concentrating on local issues, not this Washington stuff.
Yeah.
I think part of what's going to go out and what's going on is, again, as I've said, those national and local issues are not necessarily mutually exclusive,
Hmm.
but you do have to understand that they're also not synonymous, right?
Yeah.
And balancing that gap, I think, is something that people are looking for. Again, I don't think there's going to be an electoral split with Republicans, right? I think the election is going to turn out. I actually, and there's been a lot of analysis. Minnie Racker over at the Nevada Indy has done some really good stuff on this. I really don't think that this is going to be too surprising of a general election, right? I think Republicans will keep that CD2 seat. Of course, one of the rumors now is how much money the Dems are going to dump into it.
Yeah. That's what me. But I want to talk about 1, 3, and 4 then. Carrie Buck is looking like a very promising candidate, but I don't know. Do you think she can get the numbers?
She's gonna, my opinion, and again, like we're good friends with Carrie. I think she's gonna have to run a much more aggressive campaign than she did in the primary, and a much
Yeah.
more directed campaign. She was, I don't want to say absent during the primary, but she really needs to bump it up. Of course, Dina Titus is in a lot of trouble. A
Yeah.
lot of people are dissatisfied with her, and she's been screaming since 2021 that district was redistricted to eventually give Republicans an edge, right? Okay.
The Marty O'Donnell, right? Went over Ari Nagi. Marty O'Donnell is, I think he composes music for video games, is what I
Yeah,
want to say.
particularly the Halo series.
Okay. Yeah. Mostly self-funded campaign. He kind of, I don't know, did he come out of nowhere? What does the CD3 look like? Is that Susie Lee?
Yeah, it's Susie Lee's district. He didn't come out of nowhere, if I remember right. He ran for that race in
Or okay.
2024. Right.
I've heard Susie Lee is very, very, very well funded, and her district is very, very, very Democratic.
Well, no, I think that's true. Um, and that was another field that was sort of interesting. You know, Marty, we talked to a few times. I had a chance to actually have some conversations with Tara Anderson, who, compared to when I first met her about 18 months ago in Winnemucca, emerges a much stronger, much more knowledgeable candidate, could argue positions. I actually think Tara is going to go somewhere. Handicapping that race is hard. I think they're going to dump a lot of money to keep it. Um,
I
but
think
Susie
Marty
Susie
is,
Susie Lee's made some blunders here recently. The
yeah,
the
and
drunken vulgar rants.
I watched some of her recent stuff and I was like, this is no good. I've actually watched Dina Titus and Susie Lee and Horsford in Congress making speeches, and I hadn't heard them before, and I'm embarrassed that they represent Nevada. I'm not just saying that as a Republican. I'm like, these are really poor arguments. This is pathetic. And sorry, I'll be nice. I think Marty is doing a very good job of co-opting Turning Point and really using that apparatus to try to get out the vote and get out that younger group. So we'll see what happens. That'd be kind of cool. That'd be like a dark horse race, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't know if it'd be a dark horse race. I mean, the fact that he's got Turning Point. One of my problems, and I felt this since we were at the America Fest, right? Set in on some of the voter turnout things. One of my problems with the Turning Point approach is that they're very narrow, right? Their approach is going to be only looking at low propensity Republican voters. They don't really want to try to reach out to non-partisans.
More of the extreme end.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that works very well for a primary campaign. It could backfire. Not saying it will, but it could backfire in a general election.
Okay.
Um, Particularly when you have ballot questions. Of course, ballot question 7, voter ID, is on the ballot for a second time here in Nevada. Number 6, the abortion slash medical care thing that would allow like high school sports coaches to give abortion pills and stuff like that. Very weird. Um, that's really where I think nonpartisans probably need to be
Yeah.
activated. And Turning Point doesn't seem to have any interest whatsoever in reaching that group, which is an error, I think.
It's so sad. After Charlie died, I kind of watched that organization turn inward, and it really made me unhappy because I'm like, ah, you just killed the growth of that thing. It's going to be a defensive organization now. Dang it. Anyways,
Yeah, I think it's more a tactical error than the strategic.
well, it is. You guys, the extreme end is already won over. You're not going to win over those voters. They're already won over. Like, stop spending time on them. We need to move to the center and get the people that are waffling, which are the independent. Those, anyways.
Yeah, and to be
Before,
honest, neither side is really aiming at that right now.
I
That's one of the
know.
reasons I think we're in this political polarization in this 40-year period where we are a 50-50 country still.
Yeah.
And that's the fundamental problem. Neither side has been able to get enough support to shift it one way or the other.
Yeah, and I mean, the Democrats have such a strong forward motion on, we're terrible extreme mega people that if any of our candidates started to talk like a center person, they would fall head over feet over their strategy would just completely collapse. It's like all it takes is for these candidates to move to the center just a little bit. Anyways.
Well, yeah, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, but the general outline. The truth is, um, more you engage people, I think that more than anything else builds trust and desire to participate in the process.
Hmm.
Right, shutting the door and like you're not our type of people. I think even if it brings you short-term victories, and I think this is part of what we've been seeing with the Trump endorsements and primaries across the nation,
Yeah.
is that yeah, we've been really good at getting that group out, but then they can't clear it in the general election. Right, Sam Brown's a great example of that.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not surprising that those candidates, and it's not the only reason, right?
Sure.
But those candidates like Lombardo that have not leaned as heavily into the Trump endorsement at any stage of the process seem to be doing more solid, right?
Yeah. You want to talk about CD4?
CD4. Well, congratulations to Cody.
Yes. First and foremost, and for those of you who don't know, Flippo jumped out of CD4 into CD2. So it was Flippo versus Whipple for the longest time. So,
And then they put another one. That was another heavily contested, um, uh, heavily well, heavily nasty campaign race. I'll put it that way, right?
yeah.
I mean, at one time, Cody's mother gets dragged into this, right? By his campaign, and there's some other stuff going on.
The whole family got drug into that. Let's that whole family.
And again, we've interviewed Cody as well as Dave Flippo as well when they were both in the CD4, and we've done some stuff with both of them. In fact, we did a roundtable at Cody's. We're not sure if we're going to broadcast just because the quality wasn't what we wanted to. It was an experiment. So, but
Yeah.
even if
We had a fight over Israel in that round table.
yeah, which and that was done before the current Iran situation developed. No, I think that's an interesting race. I think a lot of people I've talked to think Stephen Horsford has that locked up, right? Now, it's been a question of why. Is it simply because of his appeal there in Vegas in a predominantly Democratic area? Um, I don't know. But I don't think he's made enough missteps. Interesting, I think Horsford has made far fewer missteps than either Susie Lee or Dina Titus down there in Vegas.
Yeah, he's very well put together, but I do encourage people to watch him actually in Congress on C-SPAN because I can't even have words, Scott. I don't know what these people are trying to do when they make the statements that they make. It seems ignorant and stupid.
Well, part of my argument of Horsford, and actually all three of them, is they haven't really done much, right? Which is a good way to prevent being criticized. But
Well, they don't do much in Congress. That's what I'm trying to say. Is I watch them and they make these non-statements that are completely disruptive and they're not helpful and not productive. And I'm like, what are you doing? Just making us dumb.
yeah, I do think Cody has an opportunity to, out of the ones that are running for this, I think the CD districts, I think he's the one that has the best chance to make a tack towards the center and make it stick,
Yeah.
right? We'll see if he does that
His
again.
whole family got involved. His wife's involved. Some of his kids, and it's like, it's kind of cool to see that. You don't see that much anymore.
Well, I mean, it would be cool to see that. I mean, of course, Trump's family's involved in stuff.
Yeah.
I think how that campaign shook out, it wasn't the best. the best light. I don't think it's damaging to
Yeah.
Cody. I do think though that I think he's in a unique position, and it's going to be an interesting race. Of course, CD4 covers the southern half of the 775, so it's going to be an interesting race to see how that turns out.
Yeah.
Right, but he
Yeah.
won it fairly handily, right, 60 some percent. So
There's
it wasn't even a close contest.
there's some really good people in Nevada running for office, like really good people. And some of these people, I don't think it's fair to mention them by name because I don't want to like not mention other people. But some of these people have taken time out of their campaign to help me personally with stuff that had nothing to do with the campaign. And I'm in awe at the middle of campaign season that they're willing to still help someone that's not even their constituent uh, solve a problem that has nothing to do with them. And Nevada, I really hope they appreciate some of these people because it's so rare to find people like this in the country.
Well, and I think that's true. I've been impressed by a number of them that are continuing to be engaged. At least
Mhm.
a week or so later, that have committed to continuing to be engaged
Yeah.
in some of these campaigns.
You're talking about PD2 candidates that didn't make it.
Well, not no,
There was like
not just the
30 of them.
CD2 candidates. I mean, some of them are. That had been a surprising race.
Mhm.
Um, but no, and in some of the other races, some of the candidates, Matthew Winterhawk has pledged to continue doing some of his stuff. That's been interesting. Um, a couple of the other state level candidates have already been publishing articles looking at, okay, here's what the landscape looks like now, even though I lost. I think being engaged in the process is better. We're in a stage of um, across the country, we're in a change of personnel, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
It's not just age. I'm not one that this automatically means every 30-year-old is going to get into a position. But I do think we have a change in leadership at various levels that's going on. We're having new voices come out, and to be honest, that's good. That's something we should actually be encouraging throughout the thing. And again, this gets back to sort of my concern that some of the damage that might have been done from this CD2 race, it might actually freeze that process in,
Yeah.
in CD2, as people have just been incredibly frustrated or actively being targeted. But I don't, we'll recover. But I think that if I had identified anything, I think that was the most interesting thing out of this election cycle is we're starting to see some new ideas um, and some new thoughts come to the forefront, right? And
Yeah.
not just on the Republican side. Again, I point out that the Democratic effort to reach out in the rurals is something. Frankly, I don't think a lot of the Republicans are really prepared to how to counter that.
No, I was terrified when I heard Benitez, what was her name? Teresa Benitez Thomas. When I heard her
DT.
TBT, when I heard her speak, I was like, oh, we're in trouble. Because in my mind, I was side by side comparing her speech patterns and her affect to David Flippo's. And I was like, all the independents are going to her. Shh, bleep.
Again, we've got 6 months to the election, or 5 months. I mean,
Yeah,
there's gonna be a lot of changes. I
she's so well spoken.
Well, it's not just being well spoken. It's also the issue of being able to speak in languages or speak on issues that people want to hear.
She
If
can
we could go,
off bill numbers from the assembly. She knows every issue. She knows everything. She is on it. And she's formidable.
yeah, and she's a policy wonk, right? I
Yeah.
think that's something else. Now there were a lot of problems in that. That was another crowded field. There was a lot of problems. Kathy Durham did surprisingly well, much higher than I would have thought. Of course, she's from West Wendover up here in Elko County. Kathy and I have worked on numerous projects and sat on panels and stuff together over the years. Um, she did surprisingly well expressing rural issues. We had some other people, I think, in a Democratic race that were surprisingly strong on rural issues as well. That I think there is a bit of a change coming on. If we can look at it, another thing though, stepping out of the CD2 race, I don't know how much attention you pay to this, but for my aspect, probably one of the more interesting examples of what you're identifying was actually the Democratic Attorney General primary
Oh,
between
yeah.
Nicole Cannizzaro, who won, right, Senate Majority Leader, and Zach Honine, who was the treasurer. And that
Okay.
was another one that became a very nasty, bitter race, right? Dina Titus endorses Zach Conine, and now she's on the losing side of that. But part of what was interesting about that race, at least from my perspective, and again, I'll point out I've done some work with Zach Conine when he was treasurer. He has a lot of popularity out in the rurals, right? In part because he so successfully managed the PPE program during COVID that saved
Yeah.
a lot of small businesses out here in the rurals. Now, whether one thinks that program should have been implemented, I think it's a real feather in Nevada's cap that Zach managed that to the extent that we don't see the massive fraud charges we're seeing in other states arising out of this. All right.
Yeah.
But then you have Canizaro, who's a very urban oriented, Vegas oriented candidate, right?
Okay. Did he work
That
with
was the
Caleb
point.
Cage?
Huh?
Did he work with Caleb Cage?
Who's Zach?
Yeah.
Well, Caleb would have been the emergency director at the time,
Right. Right.
right? Now, I don't know how much overlap there was in the actual program administration, right?
Mhm.
And you know that, like everything else during COVID, it's going to take us another 10 or 15 years to unravel that. I mean, the thing that's so interesting to me is why on earth did that not? Why was that managed out of the treasurer's office as opposed to controller's office? Right. I mean, the comptroller is the one who's supposed to pay bills,
Right.
but that's a
Yeah.
whole nother story. But my point for bringing it up is that was another contested race. It's not just the Republicans that had this go around. The treasurer's race was surprising. Howard Watts losing the
I don't
primary
know who
down in
won
Vegas,
treasure. Who won treasure?
huh?
Who won?
Taya, or you, for the Democratic side,
No, treasurer between God, Jack
Drew and
Carter.
Jeff Carter. Yeah, Drew Johnson won that. It
He
was a
won.
narrow race,
Okay.
right?
I
Uh,
hadn't heard.
yeah, 3,000 votes last I heard. It might be a little bit more than that now, but it was a very close race.
Yeah.
Um, so that's going to be something else too. But anyway, it's going to be I think we're going to have a bit of a jump here in the election cycle coming up,
How
right?
so?
Well, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot more interest when we get to September about this,
I
right?
agree.
Yeah, well, I think part of it, that's when campaigns really spark up. But I think there's also going to be, we'll have a better idea where the Trump administration is, right? Where the economy is. I think we also got a number of ballot questions which really are going to shape the 2026 general election in Nevada,
Yeah.
right? Um, and depending
Yeah.
on how those shake out, I think is going to play a role that we didn't see in the primary because ballot questions are never on the primary.
Did you have any kind of read on Ford versus Lombardo for the general?
You know, people are ranking at 50-50.
Ugh.
I actually give Lombardo a slight edge. Um, I think Ford's run at Attorney General has left some problems.
Hmm.
Interestingly, of course, the Republican Adriana Guzman Freilich won that Attorney General race, and that had been a centerpiece of her campaign. Is that in her view, and I happen to agree with her, that Attorney General's office isn't really. It's been focused on these national issues. It hasn't really been doing the stuff that it should be doing for Nevada voters, and that's one of the
Yeah.
pledges she's made is to reverse that. Um,
Well, if I'm Democratic Party right now, I'm seeing that I've mastered the Nevada legislature. I've completely captured it. All you need to do is get a Democrat as governor, and you can pass all the bills that got vetoed. And it seems like that would be their number one thing would be to go after that governor's chair. And I'm curious if,
Well,
yeah,
except I think the Democrats are a little bit more vulnerable in the legislature than they've been in a while, right? Republicans aren't going to gain the majority.
they could lose a few seats and still be okay.
Well, actually, I don't think they can,
Really?
right?
Okay.
Yeah, I actually think that one of the problems we saw with this disaster of a 2025 legislature was just being one vote short of a supermajority in each of the chambers, the Senate and the House, right, or the Assembly and the Senate. I think, and the fact that the Republicans stood together on a lot of issues, I think really stymied the Democrat ability to get anything done. And I think even a 3 to 4 seat Republican pickup changes the legislature. I think what you're going to find is we're going to see more stuff like what happened with the film credits bill, where there were divisions across party lines, not just between the parties, right? I think that continues if Republicans pick up even 2 or 3 seats, right? If they pick up more, it changes the dynamic. That doesn't devalue what you said about governor, and that's been one of the arguments that's come up about why. One of the things that's interesting is we could see a really contentious lieutenant governor's race emerging,
Yeah.
right? Um, and that's an interesting issue because again, you have a lieutenant governor. Well, you had Stavros Anthony who was able to do some I don't want to say damage control, but particularly his ability to get back in and stop that last minute effort to change the legislative congressional bureau after Ira Hansen did that filibuster, for lack of a better term, at the last minute. I think played a role, but he's running up against Sandra Wariegi, who is, she's a master of these legislative processes. And I think that is one of the things that's going on is you have a Democratic side that's very much worried that even if they lose 1 or 2 more seats, trying to get anything through the House and the Senate or the Assembly and the Senate is going to become far more complicated than they've been used to.
Yeah.
Right. And that legislative background is going to help.
Mm.
So anyway, I know it's in the weeds. You're not a weedy.
No, it's not. I'm just like, that governor seat is everything. If we lose that, that's the whole thing for us. So I'm just nervous. I'm nervous about
Yeah,
it.
I'm nervous. I'm nervous too, but I think Republicans will hold. I think the question is really sort of guaranteeing the nonpartisan turnout. Um, and I think a lot of that actually is going to come down to these ballot questions, right? Which I think you're going to start seeing emerging as really big issues
Yeah.
here by September. But you know, but so
God
any
bless.
final thoughts on this election, or
Yeah, well, I'm not outside of election. These are all campaign people doing campaign stuff, but that initiative 7 and 6, I think 7 was that Dave Gibbs on the
that's the
and
voter
then
ID one?
Melissa Clement for 6.
Yeah, Melissa Clement, Nevada Right to Life
Yeah.
is sort of the centerpiece on the push to vote no on 6 on the Republican side.
I just wanted to say these things take 5, 6 years to do. So I just wanted to shout out to those two because that's representative level work invested without any of the credit. So those two are awesome.
Right, right. They've been doing a lot of work, and we could throw on ballot question 7 when Dave Gibbs was running Repair to Vote PAC. Logan Gifford's work down there just got awarded a Republican 30 under 30 award. So congratulations, Logan.
Yeah.
And you know, so it's gonna be a contentious season, and we'll probably end up doing a couple more campaign or election episodes, I think. So
Maybe.
yeah. So in the meantime, if you have any comments about this, I know it's been a little bit more rambling, but these are hot, spur of the moment thoughts. Go ahead and shoot us an email at info@775alive.com. But until next time, I'm Scott Gavorski,
And I'm Crystal Newton.
and we'll see you around the 775.